To be successful at your business, you need a financial plan, and a critical part of that is understanding your cost structure. Today we'll talk about the cost structure assumptions or hypotheses that should go onto your canvas so that you can test them to make sure your financial model is going to make sense, and it'll be a good supporting basis for your business. Hi, I'm Steve Morris, and I use this StartupSOS channel to provide practical how-to advice for first-time entrepreneurs. The topic today, your cost structure, documenting those hypotheses so that you can go test them. So this is the last section to the business model canvas that will talk about your cost structure. And once you understand that, you're really ready to go ahead and put together more of a complete financial plan for your business. Everything we've talked about in the business model canvas affects your cost structure, right? Everything from your channel strategy through to your partnering, your key activities, and key resources. So you've already done a lot of the work of thinking through the different pieces. Now you need to think through the different categories of cost. That's what we'll talk about next. So for cost structure, first we'll talk a little bit about strategy, and then the different categories of cost, and then the different economies, economy of scale and economy of scope that can influence your cost structure. So there are two overall strategies from a cost structure point of view. One would be cost-driven and one is value-driven. Cost-driven would be if cost is really a primary part of your business model. Let's say Costco, for example, pretty key part of their model is to deliver low cost. So it's especially critical for them to keep costs under control. It's critical for every company to keep costs under control. But if you're a value-driven company, let's say you're shooting for more of a premium pricing, more of a high value positioning, well, you still need, obviously, to be careful about costs, but you're really going to be very focused on creating so much value that you deliver a much higher return on your cost than a cost-driven company. You've got higher prices, you've got higher margins. It certainly changes the way you think about your cost structure. But again, keeping costs under control is obviously important for any company. So when we talk about cost structure, there are two basic categories of cost: variable costs and fixed costs. Now, variable costs are costs that scale with your production. So let's say you're building a physical product. Well, there's raw material. You'll use more and more of that the more product you make, and product labor to put together the product. Again, you use more of that depending on how much product you ship. Even if you're a software company, there are some variable costs like server usage fees. For example, the more server power you need, the more you'll pay. On the other hand, there are some costs that are, at least in the short term, relatively fixed compared to those costs that scale with production. For example, salaries and rent. Day to day, your salaries aren't going to change, and your rent's not going to change based on how many products you're shipping. Over the long run, clearly they do change. As you grow the business, your volume grows, you're hiring more people, you're using more facilities, your rent's going to go up. Okay, that's in the long term. In the long term, pretty much all costs are variable. But in the short term, things like salaries and rent you can think of as more fixed cost items compared to the costs that scale with production. Now, we talked about economies. Two kinds of economies to think about and about whether they apply to your business. One would be economies of scale, and the other would be economies of scope. Scale. Are there economies that you'll get as your volume increases? For example, as you buy more and more raw material from somebody, maybe you'll get a better deal on that raw material. If you're using more and more server time, maybe you'll get cheaper and cheaper expense in terms of CPU minutes or storage or whatever. A lot of things scale with volume. So it's a good thing to think about when you think about your cost structure, especially for those variable costs we talked about. Economies of scope. This gets into the idea of vertical integration, of doing all the value chain of producing and delivering your product. Sometimes you get some economy from that. Let's say, for example, you have a distribution channel you've built and you're selling a product through it. Well, maybe you can then sell additional products through that same channel. That can be an example of an economy of scope. So are you going to be building economies of scope in your business that will help reduce your costs and become an important factor in your cost structure. So those are some of the things to think about when you think about your cost structure. In your canvas, write down what are the key fixed costs that you'll have in this business? What are the variable costs? And what economies would you expect to get as you scale the business from scale, but also what economies might you expect to get from scope as you expand the scope of what the company does? Those are the kinds of assumptions that go into the cost structure section of your business model canvas. And of course, you're putting those assumptions, those hypotheses there so you can go out and test them, maybe by talking to people who built a similar business and who can give you some feedback on what the actual cost structure of a business like yours might be. And that's our discussion of cost structure. If this was helpful, please click the like, share it, leave a comment if you have any feedback or questions. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please click the subscribe button and then click that notification bell so that you'll get notified when we have new videos coming out. And remember, this is actually the last video in a whole series that walk through the entire business model canvas. So check out the entire sequence. There's a link to the playlist right below me. And aside from that, thank you very much for watching.